How do I put it into share?
Now broadcasting.
Okay. Hi, everybody. We've had a couple of technical difficulties. That we're going to work out as the evening goes on. My name is Nicole Elefante. I'm the president and one of the founders of Cure. Thank you so much for being with us. We are a nonprofit. We're not a 501c3. Our fiscal sponsors are the Larchmont Mamaroneck Lions Club. We are partnering with LMC Media on this panel series. We're so grateful for them. They just won an Empire Award. Go LMC. And I'm here today with Anne Lobu. She is one of our Cure leaders. She was the president of the Board of Education for the Mamaroneck School District, and now she studies policy, education policy at Columbia University. I'm also here with Gabby Blumberg, who's a new Cure member, and she's worked tirelessly on this panel series with us. We are going to be taking questions throughout. I don't know if we'll ask them in the middle of the conversations or at the end, but you can put them in the chat, and just remember to go to the drop down and hit attendees so that everyone can see the question and that Anne can monitor them. And this would have been our fourth panel, but we have a beautiful bonus panel on November 18th with elected officials, Shelley Mayer, Steve Otis, Catherine Parker, Tom Murphy of Mamaroneck, the mayor of Mamaroneck, and Nancy Seligson, the town supervisor. So we're really looking forward to that. So COVID-19 has exacerbated inequity in our country and in our community, and the truths around it, and it's shined a light on it. I think the essential question through this whole panel series has been, why should we collectively care about inequity, racism, and oppression? And why do communities like ours often see it as a zero-sum game, that if we grow equity, we'll be losing something instead of gaining in so many ways? So I want to say we haven't even scratched the surface on so many of these topics, and immigration has been a thread that runs through all of these panels. It is an onion that can be peeled forever, but we have some incredible experts here tonight who are going to try their best to discuss as much as they can about it. And we wanted to start the panel. I'll introduce people's names on the panel, but they will tell you where they work and what they do, because I would not be able to cover it. We're going to start with Berta Rodriguez, and she has generously offered to share some of the personal stories of her clients who are dealing with immigration and who are immigrants to this country. Then we will have John Gitlitz, who will discuss a little bit about Mamaroneck's history of immigration, and we'll move to Dr. Vanessa Merton, who just has an expansive understanding, and I'm sure we'll have lots of questions for her. So we'll start with Berta. Berta, please tell us a little bit about your background.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for letting me be part of this panel. Right now, I am a consultant attorney with the Community Resource Center in Mamaroneck, and I assist with their deportation cases. Most of the clients that I represent are, well, 100% of them are in removal proceedings. And I also supervise part of the legal program with cases for people that are not in removal. And so I do a lot of pro bono. It's in my heart to help. So, and based in immigration. And I'm an immigrant myself from the Dominican Republic. So this is very dear to me. And I came when I was 11 years old, and I speak Spanish, so that's also another helpful for the clients that we serve. I could go on, but that's pretty much me for right now.
Berta, do you want to start? You want to just jump in and tell us a little bit about some of the stories you were going to share, so that our audience has an understanding of what people go through. I think in our minds, it's just a lot of stories and maybe things we think are facts or whatever, but we really don't have a true understanding. You can go ahead and take your time now. Thank you.
Thanks. So my goal is to provide an account of some of the reasons why some of our clients flee their country and why they're coming to the US. I'm going to repeat some of the narratives. I have been So I'm going to obviously not say any names, but I did ask the clients to give me permission to share their personal stories. It's well known that a lot of people come seeking a better life. And some of the clients that we have at the Community Resource Center are coming from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And I have other clients for other countries, but these are the primarily where they're from. For women in particular, gender violence is very prevalent in these countries. One of our cases deals with a young lady who fled her country because she was being harassed and abused by a police officer. She went to the police in her village and made a report, and they promised that they would protect her, but instead what they did was tell the police officer that she had made a complaint against him. Sadly, he found her coming home from college, and he kidnapped her. He severely raped her, and he beat her very badly. She couldn't go anywhere. When she finally came to herself, she was in a hospital. Some Good Samaritan had found her, took her to a hospital. It's, 3 days later, she was told, and her family arranged for her to be able to leave because the police officer that was threatening her promised to kill her next time he sees her. And she didn't feel safe. Obviously, she tried to go to the authorities. She tried to do the right thing. And it just, it didn't work out. So she wasn't able to have the protection that she thought that she would be able to have. The other cases that we see, I have cases where for a male, it's maybe they're working, they're bus drivers. I have one particular client that's a bus driver in his country, and he was faced with extortion. He had to pay a certain amount of money, and every day the amount that the gang members would ask would increase. And it eventually got to the point where the amount that they asked was so much that they weren't going to be able to pay it. And they began sending him threats in the likes of pictures of body parts, pictures of people beheaded, limbs, etc., and sending him notes, saying, if you don't pay, we're going to take your son. We know your son goes to school. And they actually did go to the child's school. Luckily, the principal of the school immediately called my client and informed them that there were people that they didn't know that were trying to pick up the child. So he immediately took his son and fled to the U.S., right? And now he's here. So, so it's got to the point where even, they're doing the right thing and they're working. The other client, she was going to school, she's going to college, she's trying to, have an education and not being able to survive and having to, run somewhere where you can at least survive and have a chance at life. I think that's pretty much the two stories that I wanted to bring in, but just kind of knowing that these are the people that we see walking by when we're in Mamaroneck, and they're carrying so much trauma, and, they're walking here, they're going through so much even on the way here. Even the people that sometimes they hire, they're called coyotes. Even those people end up, you might end up with someone that's going to try to extort you even further or hurt you. So very terrible situations that are bringing some of my clients here, or the ones that we are helping at the CRC. Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions. I see one in the chat.
Thank you so much. Yeah, is there a question directed at Berta, Anne?
Not yet, no.
Okay, I have one, and this could be a whole other conversation. I feel like everything everyone's going to say will be a whole other conversation. Thank you for sharing that. It was it's a lot to process. What creates some of the issues in these countries? Because right now we're at a moment in our country where we're very divided ideologically around how we literally see other human beings, whether they're immigrants, and we have these big labels. Can you because I know I had a conversation with someone who also works with immigrants, and she was saying that sometimes, a United States policy, right, will affect what goes on in a country around drugs, or, I think the story was that there were some drug dealers here in America that got sent back to their country. And then they started corruption there again. And so then people would flee again, from there. And there's obviously a demand in America for drugs, right? So we can't pretend that they come here and we're just all like, just say no to drugs. We want them. That's why they come here. So, is there, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't want to leave people with that idea that, well, those countries are a mess, and who cares what's going on over there, right? So can you speak a little bit to that?
I think that Professor Vanessa is going to speak more on that topic.
Okay.
So that will be later on, or Professor John.
Yeah.
But so through the narratives that I'm hearing from my clients, a person that is deported runs the risk of being extorted, because now this is someone that had been in the United States. They have connections to the United States, and we're going to make sure that you pay us to leave you alone. So that's the narrative that I've heard from them. But in regards to why this is happening, I think that will be the topic later on.
Okay, thank you so much, Berta.
So Berta, we do have one question. Anne asks, not me, Anne, but another Anne asks, how many people that you help don't get deported?
So that's a hard question to answer. So right now, I had one client that was deported, and this was a very difficult case. I had 14 days to get him some type of relief, and the immigration judge granted the relief and granted the stay of deportation, but ICE removed them anyway. So had it not been because ICE did not wait for the judge's decision as should have been done by law, he would not have been deported. So, so I guess 90% of the people that we help do have a chance at being here and having some type of status.
I could add something to that, which is there are very compelling studies that have been done of the difference in outcomes between immigrants who do get legal assistance of some kind and those who do not. The biggest gap is between people who are detained. And let's remember here that these are not people who are charged with crime. This is a system of so-called civil detention. It's civil jail. And they are being held without their freedom is being deprived, and they are being denied access often to getting legal counsel because of that, not because of any criminal involvement. But the difference is that people who are detained and not represented are deported about 74% or 75% of the time. People who are not detained and represented, it's more like 52%. People who are not represented and detained, the opposite way, the people who are represented and not detained, only about 27% are deported, which indicates that a very large percentage of them are candidates for lawful status, because that means a judge, even these immigration judges who are finding that they have a basis for lawful status. And then finally, people who are represented and not detained, is actually only about 14 or 18%, that range get deported. So you can see what a huge difference it makes, because the immigration system is so impossible to navigate without legal representation. And yet, even though these people are locked up, have no right to counsel.
That's very helpful. That paints a picture that I think clarifies, for me. Anne, do you see another question?
No.
Okay. We're going to move to Mr. Gitlitz. Hello, John.
Hello.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and what you'd like to shine some light on tonight.
Well, I thought I was doing shed some light on kind of the role of immigration in America, but the question you just asked, Nicole, sends my mind up in all kinds of other ways. So you've got a choice. But anyway,
I know your mind works like that, John. I know you. I mean, if you, I'm sorry, say that again.
I'm going to start off with a story about the Dominican Republic that I haven't thought about for years, but Berta's first comment brought it back to mind. Years ago, I became friendly on my trips to the Dominican Republic with a man who is the president of the Dominican Committee on Human Rights. I don't know if you know Virgilio Almanzar. And he made it his hobby to try to gross me out. Every time I would arrive in the Dominican Republic, he would take me around to meet widows whose husbands had just been killed by the police. The first one stuck in mind, she was 19 years old and 9 months pregnant. The police had broken into her little shack in an alleyway in one of the small colonies of Santo Domingo at 4 in the morning. They grabbed him, beat him up, threw him through the back wall of the shack, which tells you something about the quality of the shack, into a little empty square a few meters around behind the back wall, went out, and while he was still shaking, lying on the ground, put a bullet through his head. It was announced the next day in the press that he was active drug trafficker, and that he had accidentally been killed resisting arrest. My contact, who knew him well because he was an organizer for the Human Rights Committee, said no. The police were going after him because he was an organizer for the Human Rights Committee. As we left his house, we stopped on the nearest main street to catch our breaths. And we were standing in front of the police station. And 2 people came up to us, 2 young men came up to us and said, "We saw the whole thing. We know what happened. And it's the way she told you. But the police have told us not to talk to anyone or we will be killed as well." Does it sound credible to you, Berta? Anyway, I was sitting watching 2 policemen in rocking chairs on the front of the police station, watching these 2 guys telling us the threat they were under, which obviously meant they were coming to me and to Virgilio, hoping that we could protect them. I don't think I'd ever been so scared in my life. I am certain if I were any one of the people involved, if I had the chance to come to the United States, I'd come immediately. And I hate to put them through the kinds of things we put people through. I'll leave that for storytelling for the minute. And that wasn't even on the country I was thinking of talking about. My name is John Gitlitz. Some of you know me. I've been involved in the Community Resource Center as a member of the board almost since it was founded. Currently, I have the best job in the world, which is that I'm retired. What else? I've been fast. I taught all kinds of things while I was teaching at Purchase College. One of them was a course on immigration. And dealing with immigration matters have been emotionally, psychologically depressing, frustrating, and wonderful for the last 20 years. And now you have to think whether you want me to talk about the history of US involvement in Latin America, or you want me to talk about why immigration has been so important in
this is what happens when you have people who know so much about a topic. They're both super deep, and I think keeping it local is helpful, but is there any way you can just give a general statement? Because I don't want to, I'm going to be completely transparent. I don't want to make a general statement like I did before, like, well, it's American policy. You know, like, I don't want to get into that because I honestly don't know, but I have heard stories about American policy and how we interact with other countries and the cultures, you know, that get created there around things like drugs. And so if you could just give really a very general, like, yes, it's complicated.
Very quick panorama, although I'm a teacher who taught an hour and 15-minute classes. I'll pick Nicaragua because it's easier to do it through a case than to move on. I used to ask my classes, is the problem in Latin America Spanish colonialism and the heritage it left, or 19th century global capitalism? And almost everybody always says it's Spanish colonialism. It left those countries corrupt and ruined. Some of them are more sophisticated and they say it's also the Indians, and some say the Catholic Church. All of those are important, but American colonialism, European colonialism played a huge role in the history of Central America. And there's a lot of responsibility for what is going on there today. And it goes way the heck back to the middle of the 19th century, when the Nicaraguans and others discovered that Europeans in the United States, and particularly American academics, have an insatiable, maybe lawyers, have an insatiable thirst for coffee. And the Nicaraguans and others realized they could make money growing coffee. But if they were going to grow coffee, they needed three things, maybe four things. They needed to get control of the land, which was largely occupied by native Indians. Once they got control of the land, they would need to guarantee a dependable labor force, which might not want to be a dependable labor force. They would need to amass the power that would let them do that. And all that would cost money, and they needed to get somebody to finance them. And from there, it went downhill. This last half of the 19th century across Central America saw a massive land grab that pushed the local peasantry, the local Indians, the local African American descendants of slaves off the land and into forced labor via military-backed, police-backed governments supported by Europe and the United States in turn. Jump forward, since you told to make it really quick. In 1944 in Nicaragua, there was, they call it a revolutionary uprising. It was probably a street riot in the capital city. It forced the then long-standing dictator to flee the country and brought to power a middle-class school teacher who had three major elements to his program. He believed deeply in democracy and immediately legalized all the political parties, all the opposition, including, God forbid, guess who? The Communist Party, which was relatively small. Second, he authorized people to organize labor unions. Doesn't sound terribly revolutionary, except if your country depends on that structure, it's pretty revolutionary. And they promulgated an agricultural reform to return the land to the peasants. So far, I've pretty much left the US out of that. I blamed it all on Europe and particularly Germany. But there was another company that had come into Nicaragua by then, not coffee, but bananas. Something called the United Fruit Company, which faced an even more acute, similar problem: land, mostly land, less labor. They didn't like what was going on. Obviously, they were about to lose their land. They were represented in the United States by a law firm some of you may have heard of called Sullivan and Cromwell. One of Sullivan and Cromwell's leading attorneys, two of them in fact, had positions in the Eisenhower administration. Some of you may know them. One was the Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles. The other was the director of the CIA, Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles set about organizing the overthrow of the new democratic government of Guatemala. In 1954, a dissident band of military supported by the CIA arose in rebellion. The rebellion inspired fear in the government because as it began, American planes overflew the capital city, dumping folders on the capital city saying, "You better leave, life's still alive." The government fled, and there followed a half century of military dictatorships and civil war.
That makes brilliant sense.
I have only started.
Okay, wait.
That's to finish. You started. You're stuck. That gave rise to a wave of horrendously brutal revenge. Anybody who had been connected to the, quote, revolution was liable to end up dead. It was a civil war that went on until the 90s. But it hit its biggest moment, its most insane moment, its most brutal moment in the 1980s. Why the 1980s? And you remember what was going on throughout Central America in the 1980s? There were revolutions in Guatemala. There were revolutions, I've been talking about, there were revolutions in El Salvador. There were problems in Nicaragua. And Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. He proclaimed his support for the government of Guatemala that was defending itself against international communist movement, intervention, and all the rest. But there was another little issue. The militaries in Central America weren't making much ground against the rebels because the rebels had lots of popular support. So with the advice and support of the United States, they changed their strategy. If we're going to defeat the rebels, the only way to do it is to get rid of their support. We can get their support. We can inspire fear in their support. And the strategy become attacking not the rebels whom they couldn't find, but the peasants, the people in the merchant towns. One last example, and I've overtalked what you said I could do.
Rule breaker, John.
One of the big ones, one of the big things that just is the example of this in Guatemala. There was a merchant town, a commercial town, a little village really. It was the center of a district on the slopes of a volcano that came down to the coast, a 2-day walk to a much larger town called San Marcos. That town, because it was the commercial center of the region, was vital to the guerrillas. And they supported the guerrillas. And they provided the guerrillas with medicines, munitions, intelligence, etc. The army went in with a blindfolded kid, asked him to identify everyone who had supported the guerrillas, and then shot them. Herded the population into, I don't know, a building, I don't remember what it was, I think it was a school, set fire to it, and burned to death half the population of the town. Support for the guerrillas disappeared. There's a wonderful book about it called Silence on the Mountain. And it was silence because nobody would talk about it.
So John,
I'm finished. Last sentence.
Okay.
I'm going to bring it to Mamaroneck. The single largest community of Guatemalans, which is probably the largest immigrant group in Mamaroneck now, comes from the district of San Marcos. Every time I have ever asked them if there was any fighting and tried to talk about that period with them, they all say, no, nothing ever happened there. Nothing ever happened there. 30 years later, the silence on the mountain is still present. Okay, now I'll go.
Thank you so much. I mean, I really hang on every word because I don't know any of this history. And I think that's part of what we're discovering in these panels is that it's so easy to talk generally across the country about all of these issues, but they are so steeped in things that came before. We have some questions, and do you want to go to them, or should we move to Dr. Merton?
I think if we go to Dr. Merton, then we can perhaps loop back to our local context, because it seems like some local questions.
Yeah, I think we're going to jump back and forth. Okay, so Vanessa, can we call you Vanessa, or would you like to be Dr. Merton?
Please call me Vanessa.
Okay.
A quick answer to one of the questions. Oops, it says I'm muted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Well, I would like to actually take a moment now to share screen, apropos of John's very vivid and compelling reference to the history. And it really is necessary to have a clue about immigration policy in this country to somewhat understand the history. So I'm trying to go to this shared screen. Let's see if this works. Are people able to see that?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
History
Okay.
of, yes.
Yes, so this is just cheap, you know, this is just a scratching the surface, really. And it's not a very complete history, but it gives you an idea. And if I could get my cursor to go over to the screen, there we go. I will bring it down a little bit. It's just a continuing history of United States frank military intervention, frank disregard of sovereignty, you know, the tantamount, nobody was attacking us from any of these countries. There's no threat from any of these countries, no conceivable threat to the United States government. Many of these interventions clearly were totally in support of corporate interests that were trying to or had taken over the land and driven people off the land, as John described, and so forth. This is just a small part of it, and only up until 2004. Perhaps since that time, one of the most egregious examples of this in Honduras, where starting in 2008, I must report, regrettably, that the Obama administration, under the leadership of Secretary of State Clinton, conspired, frankly, in the overthrow of the person who had been elected democratically to the presidency of that country and who was interested in land reform and in trying to do something about the already horrifically entrenched gang corruption and ownership and dictatorship. There's this very complex and very effective, powerful combination of what we would call gangs. Gang is not a good translation for the word mara, which is what is the correct term in Spanish. Mara means something much, much more powerful than we think of as gangs. And we always argue in the courts about this translation. I'm trying to stop sharing my screen with for some reason, my cursor is going berserk and refusing to respond. I won't do this again. Come on.
That's okay. You can continue to talk anyway.
Yeah, okay. Well, in any event, the combination of these incredibly brutal, violent, vicious, and depraved, I would have to say, people who cut up small children, leave them in front of the doorsteps of their parents, who engaged in all kinds of torture, you know, including many well-documented cases of things like going into the middle of town, picking out somebody at random, opening up that person's body, ripping out organs of the body and eating them raw in front of the crowd to kind of demonstrate their potency and their power and so forth and so on. That type of brutality and violence, which is also often drug fueled to some extent, is part of the the part of the problem, but it has been completely entrenched interacting with police. It's taken over police and to a large extent the military in all of the Triangle countries. Honduras is one of the most corrupt. Its president, JOH, as he's affectionately referred to, Juan Hernandez, is obviously, he's squirreled away many millions of dollars through drug dealings. His brother has been indicted and is being prosecuted by the United States government for massive drug trafficking. It's a completely criminal conspiracy. It's very clear. And at the same time, they are also involved.
You froze. Can you hear us, Vanessa?
Some involvement of the church, actually referred as kleptocrats, the people who have stolen everything of value in the country, control it, and ruthlessly, for example, take tax dollars and foreign aid. We give them a lot of foreign aid, and it all goes directly into the pockets of this criminal oligarchy. And they claim to be spending it. And then when there's any kind of investigation, any witnesses, anybody comes forward, they're immediately tortured and killed. It's a completely, the rule of law does not exist. What we think of as law, where if there are consequences, even if you're powerful, there are consequences when you break the law. No, there are none. And so that's the culture which to some significant extent was created by in the case of Honduras most recently, we conspired to drive that duly elected president out of the country and install one of the oligarchs instead. And this is the history that people don't want to hear about. I say it's hard to hear and impossible to forget. But to another part of the history, and what I wanted to talk about were some issues that are from today, but are not as well recognized as, of course, the terrible stories, which I think most people have heard about children in cages, about the separation of families, about the fact that there are still hundreds of children who were separated from their parents with absolutely no effort made by the government. The government has now admitted this in court repeatedly, our government, that they did not even try to keep track of the parents and the children with any eye to ever being able to reunify them. There were nonprofits and other advocates who worked very, very hard to try to, and to try to reunite people when possible. But that whole sordid, sad story, the story perhaps of the immigration court judge who, with a straight face, proclaimed that there was no need to appoint counsel for the 3-year-old who was appearing in front of him. He had allowed and enabled 3- and 4-year-olds and to represent themselves in immigration court very effectively, he thought, repeatedly, and he didn't see why this was a problem. And so on. These stories, I know many people who are interested enough to tune in tonight, and we very much appreciate that interest, already have heard. And so I thought I wanted to focus a little more on some of the other stories that you may not have heard about as much. One of them was and is the fact that we ask people to navigate this incredibly intricate, complicated, what the judges call far more difficult than the Internal Revenue Code, this system of law and policy divided among 3 agencies, the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security now, and Department of Justice, overlapping jurisdictions, contradicting laws, their computer systems don't talk to each other. It's a madhouse, actually. It's totally chaotic. It's an appalling lack of, can't even call it a system. And people are expected to somehow comply with the law and meet these incredibly difficult, minute requirements in order to qualify for status, which in fact, they have the qualifications for. When we were talking about this panel before, I pointed out, one of the issues I have is with the terminology when people use the term illegal. it just immediately demonstrates a complete lack of any knowledge or understanding of our immigration system, because it's not possible. It's not as if there are a lot of people walking around who have some kind of lawful status and can instantly produce proof of it. Because our laws are so complicated and difficult and contradictory, many, many people absolutely qualify for lawful status if they had just a little bit of legal representation and a little bit of assistance in being able to file the right forms in the right fashion and get an adjudication of them. And that, you know, to me, that is not a person who's illegal. That's a person without a lawyer, which is a very different question. So you know, just to give you an idea or an image, if you will, of what I'm talking about, I did send along a document, just see if I can manage to get this one to you. Come on, here we go. Where is it? Here it is. Just as an illustration, this is, can you see this little chart? Yeah, well, this is the most straightforward part of our immigration system. This is just a green card, a standard family-based green card application, the kind of process that you would have to go through in order to obtain that. And these are all the different decision points and the different overlapping and agencies involved and the decisions and so forth. I just want to give people a sense of what people without lawyers are up against when they try to establish their lawful status. It is also the case that many people do not understand that there is no line for people to get in. We often hear about, why don't you get in line? Why don't you wait your turn? Why are you coming here unlawfully? Well, a couple of facts that many people don't know. We don't have a line. We don't have any kind of line for people to qualify. What we have are some very stringent quotas that were set back in the 1960s as part of a political deal and have not been updated or changed since. And one of the aspects of this is that people who want to come to this country and have a basis through family, through employment, or through other certain religious workers, other qualifying people, if they're coming from the country of, let's say, Belgium, they have to be the same number of people each year are eligible for a visa from the country of Belgium as are eligible from the country of Mexico, or from the country of India, or the country of China. There is no consideration of the realities of the population in the United States, our family ties, the need of people in the United States for access to their family members, sometimes to enable them to work and run businesses and contribute to our society as they do. Another myth which people often don't understand is that immigrants in this country pay a fantastic and very, very large amount of taxes and Social Security, which for the most part, they will almost never collect the benefits from. They pay a lot of state, local property taxes, and they get, as I think John mentioned once to us, you know, the first thing people do is they want to be right with the law. So they get those ITIN numbers. They don't have the Social Security number. They get the ITIN number so they can start paying their federal taxes too. And it's actually a great financial boon. Now, when I make these assertions, whether it's about the history, about what's going on in these other countries, about the role of immigrants here and so on, you know, people want to see and hear more than just my word for it. So what I did was I put together a list of what I will call reliable resources. Alas, a great deal of mythology is out there, and it is very difficult, I think, for people to identify legitimate sources. So again, if I can just get down here, come here, little cursor, there we go. I wanted to just show people, I understand you're going to be able to circulate this at a later date. And, you know, I tried to provide some information, some overall sources where you can find the information that I'm talking about. I also just put together, frankly, a collection of reports, studies, and newspaper articles. There are some very valiant and heroic journalists who have done a great job of going up against these mythologies, and articles about different aspects in particular of the Trump administration that I think people might find interesting and somewhat enlightening. Identified a couple of books which are very accessible. These are not for lawyers. These are books of people who are generally interested in the topic and want to especially understand some more about the history. And then I included some information about if you wanted to help somebody who is an immigrant, where you might be able to access those resources. So if people want to know more and want to understand the basis for my claims about some of these things, that this is one place where you can look for that kind of information.
That's incredible, Vanessa. And we always offer resources after these conversations, and we keep them on our website forever. So people can always access them.
These will probably change over time, but anyway, well, it's a starting point for people. And just to say a couple of more things. So to understand what's been going on over the last 4 years in particular, you should understand that the attack of the Trump administration has not been, certainly not exclusively, on what they would call illegal or unlawful immigration. It has been very much focused on lawful immigration, immigration that is permitted under our current law. And it has been accomplished, but not with legislation. There has been no legislation. There has been no change in the law in the last 4 years. What they have done is by, in many cases, really absurd interpretations of existing statutes, or in other cases by enacting regulations that are incredibly draconian and again show a real ignorance. They don't really understand how the legal system operates very well. Or in other instances, they've also stacked the immigration courts with their own appointees who are all former ICE prosecutors, and who actually, many of whom do not seem to have very much knowledge of immigration law. And they've actually either bought out or driven out many of the great majority of the immigration judges who were in the system before the last 4 years. All of these actions have been done through the executive branch, through these proclamations, these executive orders, such as the Muslim ban. That's one that people do remember, although it's hard to remember all of what has gone on. And that's why I included some reports that have titles like 100+ policies of the Trump administration to destroy lawful immigration. But you may remember right at the beginning of this administration, those of us who were lawyers ended up rushing to the airports trying to intervene, because people were in the air traveling to the United States with lawful visas, with their green cards. And they were being turned back and held and put in detention and then repatriated to countries, even though they had lawful status in the United States, based on what was ultimately struck down to some extent. It was later reinstated and so forth. But that's been the history of the last 4 years, has been rash, reckless, and ignorant administrative actions, executive branch actions, which in some cases, through strenuous and difficult litigation, has been struck down by the courts or enjoined by the courts, and has not had its full effect on this country. But it's very important to understand and to notice that so much of the antipathy, the antagonism to immigrants has nothing to do with their disobeying or violating American law. So maybe I'll stop there. I think there'll probably be, excuse me, questions.
Yeah, my head is spinning.
I'm sorry. That
no. Don't apologize. Don't apologize at all. I think this is stuff we know. We feel this, but we don't know it. I think we feel it, but we don't know it. I guess one of my questions is, Ann and I were thinking of some questions together before the panel. And so when we hear, before the Trump administration, when we heard about immigration reform, right, and Democrats want a package, whatever that is, what are the proposals and policy changes that we should, as citizens who believe immigrants should come to this country in a safe and humane process, and live here if they are paying taxes and abiding by the law, which they're doing, and working, and God knows, let's put it out there, helping us run our communities, right? How do we fight for them, and what do we ask for? Because this immigration reform package, what's in that? Is there something in that we should be digging for and saying, we want these 3 things now,
Well, so several of the websites that I put up there, the American Immigration Council, for example, already have up on these websites, there are detailed proposals for many different changes in many different aspects of the system. I mean, certainly the quotas I spoke about are ridiculous. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever to, as part of the fundamental flaw, I think, this may be getting too philosophical, but really, when we talk about supremacy, when we talk about racism or gender bias or many other forms of which people are basically saying there's this whole group of other people who aren't like me, and I'm better than they are, I'm superior to them, and therefore I should have more rights and I should have more advantages. That whole mindset is, when you think about it, the only, the whole notion of nationality, of boundaries, of immigration, in some sense, it's a completely artificial construct that has people's, nationalities have changed. In my lifetime, the boundaries have shifted so much. And what the nationalities, the ethnicities, what people identify with, especially in this country was supposed to be different because the idea was wherever you came from, if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, etc. That was the whole idea, that you could be equal, that you would not forever be suppressed or repressed or limited or held down because of where you were born. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're saying these people have to die, have to be tortured, have to endure extreme misery and poverty and dictatorship and complete lack of political freedom, and live in terror of these criminals, these who rule them. Why? Because they were born there. And because I was born in New York, I don't have to do that. I mean, you really have to grapple with that fundamental, I think, to begin to analyze policy in a way that makes sense. Now, am I calling for open borders? No, I'm not. I also, by the way, my daughter who works in this field will hate me for saying this, but I don't believe we should abolish ICE. Okay, I don't believe that, that's not the point. The point is to have rational policy that does recognize that this country has an immense amount of land and wealth and opportunity, and people who can take advantage and work within that framework only add to the strength of this country. One last little point. I'd like to go back. One of the things that the Trump administration did, there are so many minute things, but one of them was the motto of USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the agency that used to be charged with helping people regularize their status, get lawful status, and get on a pathway to green cards. That agency, since really its inception, its motto was a nation of immigrants. We've all heard that phrase, right? A nation of immigrants. It doesn't seem that controversial. They changed the motto. They changed the motto to enforcement of immigration law. And I think that speaks volumes. I'd really like to see the motto go back to a nation of immigrants. That would indicate to me that we were starting down the right path.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think when we spoke to you earlier before the panel, I think I asked, what is this obsession with just, people coming from Latinx countries or countries that we would label as Black countries, even though those people wouldn't call themselves Black? Why aren't the 10,000 Irish who have overstayed their visas not being dragged in by ICE? And I think, you dropped the supremacy word, but we are the Understanding Racism Through Education, coalition. And that's glaringly obvious, that we are not chasing down folks who integrate by skin color into our,
It's important to know, Nicole, that the history of this country's immigration law has been 100% racist.
Yes, I've been studying it.
We had almost no regulation of immigration in this country until 1883, when we started with the Chinese Exclusion Act. And one of the things people find hard, my students find hard to understand, my law students, is how is it that actually immigration is the only area in American law where it is constitutional to discriminate on the basis of race, ethnicity, etc. It's 100% been upheld over and over again. And it's a very troubling heritage, which still, unfortunately, governs a great deal of our policy.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. So before we move back to John, because someone has a local question, Berta, did you want to chime in on something that you had written in the chat, or are you past that? It's totally up to you. I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. I think I answered, it was somebody asked a question and then I was just following up more on the local level.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think that's like what I hope.
Okay, because I know John's bursting a button over there. I gotta get that.
Yes, go ahead.
So Mr. Gitlitz, take yourself off of mute. But can you're on mute still. Yeah, can we start with a question? Gabby, do you want to ask your question to bring John local?
Sure, yes, I would, but John, did you have something that you wanted to add just quickly to what?
And it may, I'll pick up your question, but I wanted to make one comment on what Vanessa said. I think she's absolutely right, absolutely right. One of the things that most fascinates me is if you look at immigration history, we have basically rejected every single group of any size that came to the US. And we have charged them with exactly the same things, whether it was the Irish, the Italians, the Jews, the Chinese. We all said they take away American wages, American jobs and lower wages. People who spent their lives trying to figure out whether that's true, and almost everybody agrees, if there's any truth to it, it's that much. They talk about, they want us to speak German instead of English. That was Benjamin Franklin. But we hear it today about Spanish. It's very hard to get people to change those beliefs that mark protective walls against strangers they don't quite understand and feel threatening.
Yeah.
Secondly, there's another problem with the quotas, I think, and it's not a legal problem, but it is an economic problem. Essentially, if you look at the growth of the American labor force through years, the native growth, the people growing up, the expanding population of the United States, through much of our history has not been sufficient to fill the demand for labor in a growing economy. And the only way we can get that and fill it is only three ways: send jobs abroad, build more machines, or bring in immigrants. And that tension between bringing in the immigrants we need and designing quotas to keep them out, and then rationalizing them by all of these mythical definitions of the other, they work at counter purposes and have for much of our history. That's all I wanted to add to what you said, Vanessa.
Yeah, people want to see really dynamite statistical studies on the impact on business, labor, and on the immigrant entrepreneurs and immigrant workers. Check out the website on my list. It's called the Fiscal Policy Institute. They have devoted themselves for a long time to generating very precise analyses of these phenomena. and it's a really good resource for this kind of.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can't wait to dig into those resources.
My answer to that, other than all the literature, which my eyes are too old, my head is too, I can't grasp it. Just look at Mamaroneck. What would Mamaroneck look like without all the immigrants who've come here over the last 20 years? Look at businesses that founded. Look at all the people who clean our houses for us and do those other things. The restaurants who cook for us because we no longer cook at home. They have been
take care of the elderly and the children.
And yeah.
I could go through the list of all of these things.
Yeah.
Which contribute to our well-being in one way or another, contribute to our standard of living. And yet we claim, like one of the trustees in Mamaroneck did a few years ago, that nothing but a bunch of locusts who come to eat and leave nothing behind.
Ooh, I'm glad I wasn't there when that person said that. So Gabby has a question for you, John, and there's also a question in the chat room from Pam. So you want to start, Gabby, and then we'll move.
Sure. Yeah. So my question is, you're front running me here. So Berta opened up with a really moving sort of picture on the very, very micro level from people within our community that she works with. And then, we've gone very macro and we're talking about national policy and history. And I would love for you to kind of take us in between those places and give us a little bit of a sense of sort of how immigration has affected our community here over the past, say, 30, 40 years. And perhaps tie in Pam's question from the chat, which is, immigration policy seems obviously driven primarily at the national level, but what impact can there be at a more local level other than just enforcement? So a little bit of history, a little bit of policy, just in our community here. Just quickly.
Take a deep breath, John. Take a deep breath.
Yeah. On the eve of World War I, the immigrant population of the United States, the foreign-born population, was 14.5% of the American population. After we passed the sternest quotas at the end of World War I, by 1965, it was down to 4.5% of the population, and we needed more immigrants. So we opened it up. We opened it up a way. It's fascinating. The population of Mamaroneck would be smaller today than it was in 1980, except for the immigrant population that has come here. In most of it, it's been Latin American. If you look at the census, and the census has some problems, and the census doesn't classify and break this down in tremendously helpful ways. In 1980, 1% of the Mamaroneck population called itself Hispanic. In 2010, that was 25% of the population of Mamaroneck. It's been a huge growth. When I got here in '86, you could walk down the main street and nobody was speaking Spanish. Now you go down, now my friends come to Latin America and say, well, if I have to go out on my own, will I get lost? Will I be able to speak to anybody? And I kind of laugh. But the more serious answer to that is the one that we were just chatting back and forth with Vanessa. They have made, over the time, a major contribution to the maintenance and the revitalization of the village economy, both as workers and as consumers. They probably generate far more jobs than they take away. And we can go back to the studies Vanessa just mentioned. And yet, a significant portion of them lack the documentation that allows them to live up to their full potential and forces them to live in a kind of never land, which was also destabilizing, was awful, emotionally traumatic, and infinitely worse after Trump came to power. I have never seen such fear in the immigrant community as I have over the last 4 or 5 years, 4 years. And there's one more thing I want to say as an overview of Trump. The one quota that wasn't set in the 1965 immigration law was the quota on refugees. That floated to be determined each year by the president. And it's always been political. At the height of the Cuban era of Save the Cubans from Communism, we allowed as many as 200,000 immigrant refugees in 1 year, and we presumed they were all fleeing persecution. Even the one who came and said on the beach, thank God, now I can buy a television set. In the middle of the Obama presidency, he set a quota of 80,000 or 70,000 refugees per year. And some years we came close to resettling that many. The most recent number set by President Trump was 15,000. I think there may have been a later one than that, but that was the last one I saw, was 15,000. That's a slap in the face of the world, of the people who suffer, and us, because we need them. Even worse, considering all the other stuff we've been talking about. 2 years ago, there were something like 18,000 refugees who came in. The single biggest number were authorized from the Democratic Republic, no, from the Republic of the Congo. For all of Latin America, the quota was 715 people. That makes no sense whatsoever.
So John,
I answered that.
well, somebody answered, I'm sorry, Vanessa, I think you answered Pam's question a bit in the chat around how to support locally. We have, Anne, do you want to read that question from Anne C?
Sure. So Anne asks, I do taxes for low to middle income people in New Rochelle and Mamaroneck. Before Trump got into office, we had many people with taxpayer numbers, ITINs, right? That's how you say it, coming to do taxes. Since Trump got in, these people have disappeared. If they are not coming to us, where are they going? What are your facts to say that they are paying taxes?
Well, a lot of them have been deported, you might have noticed. So that does account for reduction in the number of people who are coming to have their taxes paid. And a lot of people who have not yet been deported are understandably terrified because their efforts to comply with the law can make them targets for ICE interventions, which are after the fact declared to be unlawful or illegal by courts. But as Berta pointed out so eloquently, it's a little late after you've already been deported. One of the articles I put up there discusses the widespread and wholesale deportation of American citizens by ICE, which is a continuing problem that has increased dramatically in the last 4 years. And ICE refuses to even allow American citizens to come back. I mean, we are dealing with a very lawless regime. I don't know any other way to describe it. And so I'm not surprised to hear that there has been a diminution of people showing up to pay their taxes. I guess the other piece of it could very well be difficult for all of us, but the reality is of the competition of online tax, a lot of people feel a lot safer filing their taxes online than having any contact with any physical setting, I'm sure.
And Berta, you had something to add on that too.
Yeah, so and I wrote it in the chat, but I realized that other people won't be able to see what I wrote. So my answers are based on the clients we serve. We, at the Community Resource Center, we refer them to trusted tax preparers, and there have been nonprofits that are helping them do their taxes free of charge. So people are definitely still filing their taxes, especially our clients. And it's something we encourage because it also helps them to show good moral character, that they have always been filing their taxes. So it's something that definitely our clients are doing.
And Berta, what about the claim that immigrants are taking advantage of our generous supports or welfare policies? Is that something that people do or are able to do?
No, so that's also, and it's a misconception. They don't qualify. They don't qualify for any of the services. You have to have a social security number. You have to have some type of status, whether it's, you're a refugee, asylee, you have to have some type of status, green card after 5 years to be able to qualify for even some of, the food stamps and things like that. Or you have to be a US citizen. So there's no way that you can get a service that you don't qualify for. And go ahead.
I was going to say, what about the benefits that some of us were able to get during the pandemic, like the extra unemployment insurance or the $1,200 checks?
No unemployment insurance at all. No, they did not qualify to get any of the extra money that some of us were able to get. And in regards to some of my clients, even during COVID, even after the governor forced closures and told businesses to close, some of, especially Mamaroneck, there's one particular company that forced their workers to come to work. And some of my clients lost co-workers to COVID, and they were still had to show up to work. And I'm talking about assembly lines, and obviously I wouldn't say where, but but they didn't have a choice. They had to continue working. They got to keep paying their bills, and they are not able to qualify for anything.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I would just add that they also made a rule that if you were in a household, even if you were a US citizen who was entitled under the law to get some kind of COVID relief, I mean, it was pitiful for everyone, but something. If you were in a household with someone who didn't have status, not someone who necessarily was an unlawful status, but someone who didn't have status, that disqualified you from eligibility as well. The only benefit that people without lawful status can obtain is a very limited access to emergency Medicaid in circumstances where their lives are at stake. When it's an emergency, life-threatening situation, hospital emergency rooms can provide some, and not up to the point of stabilization. Once you reach the point of being stabilized, they toss you out because you have no insurance. But there is that very limited benefit. But other than that, no.
Pam asks about can there be eviction protection with people without status?
Yes.
Oh, yes. So they're supposed to, and also, like my answers are always going to be based on the clientele, right? So yes, there are eviction protections that are supposed to protect everyone, but what we are seeing is that because our clients don't have some type of status, that they're being threatened. Well, if you don't do this, I'm going to call ICE. And then it's a reality now because ICE is showing up to the neighborhoods. So, so even though they have these protections, they still are forced to, sometimes they have to leave because they're afraid. So what's happened now is just that you have terrified community.
Yeah, it's a lot to digest. So we're dispelling myths right here about immigrants take our jobs, they take our benefits, they're criminals. I mean, granted, are there a handful of people who come here who are criminals? I'm sure from every country. But at the end of the day, they're fleeing violence and poverty and dictatorships to come to what is known throughout the world as a beacon of safety and promise. And there's really no line for them to get on. And they're terrified, especially under, the last we'll call it a regime, John, the last 4 years where things are not as rational as Vanessa put it in terms of laws and policies or just actions against immigrants. And so it's just really, it's a tangled web. And I think it's a puzzle. It's the supremacy piece. It's the story about the other. It's the myths we carry. And really what I see, are people who come here, work hard, their children, end up doing better than they did. They contribute to the economy and fill our neighborhoods with culture and more abundance. And so how do we get off this ride we're on where it's just so toxic? Because I feel, again, well, I think Vanessa, to your point, we have to go locally. We have to look at your answers in the chat are there, and we will share them with our audience, that there are local ways to support. We're finding on all of these issues that when we really look in our neighborhoods and in our backyards, we can make change and we can feel change and see change.
Well, the work that you're doing here is, part of the big problem is this misinformation, this disinformation. So it's a contribution just to become familiar with some of the reality and be in a position to challenge when people make these comments about immigrants are criminals. There's a far lower rate of criminality at all levels, misdemeanor, felony, any level you want. Plenty of studies to demonstrate this. Far lower rate than native-born Americans. I'm sorry, but it's true. Or this business about the line, I just wanted to bring up one point which people don't understand. Even if you are completely 100% qualified as a family member under our law to come to this country, because of these artificial quotas and other terrible aspects of the administration of these systems, which has gotten worse in the last 4 years. For example, if you're the brother or sister of someone from Mexico or the Philippines or India or China, yeah, you can get a visa, and then you have to wait for 24 years. 24 years. Actually, India, China, the Philippines, it's more like 15 years, 19 years. It's that kind of, just that much information. If people could understand and use the resources available to teach themselves. Yes. I wish that we taught immigration policy in our high schools. I wish that we would teach the history of immigration to this country, the contributions of immigrants, of course.
Add that to the list. Add that to the list, Vanessa, of things that we don't understand. That's why we're not civic minded. That's why we get into these messes. I want to read one fact that Janet posted. The Social Security Administration estimates that undocumented immigrants contribute about $12 billion each year to the cash flow of the program without receiving the benefits in return because of their status. So if they're putting into, let's say, Social Security, they are not receiving it, but my dad is, and my mom is, and whoever else is. And also there's a question from Deborah. Approximately how many Daca and TPS folks are in Mamaroneck and or Westchester County? How can we help them? So maybe, I don't know, Berta, do you have any stats on that? The questions are rolling in.
Well, I don't have an approximate amount of number for DACA and TPS, but in regards to how we can help, the DACA, they just had the renewals, so sometimes they need assistance with their funding. TPS is hard. We're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen with TPS. It's supposed to expire for some countries in January. So we're well, I guess we need funding just to help them with application fees. We're trying to get more volunteers, sometimes just having people be able to go to court with them. So just reach out to, in our case, to the Community Resource Center to see in what areas you can help.
Can you tell us what TPS stands for?
Temporary Protected Status. Temporary is the magic word, which is going to expire.
Berta, is there, well, again, questions are coming in on how to reach each other, but we'll give resources and email addresses of any of our panelists who want to receive emails, if that's okay. We always send resources and actions and after every panel.
I sent to you a description of the clinic that I run at Pace Law School with all the contact information. Unfortunately, at this time, due to the constraints of COVID, we are not able to accept ourselves. We're not able to offer representation to new clients right now, but I did put on the resource list the local providers, legal service providers who more recently have said that they are able to consider offering representation at this time. So that's also on that list.
Okay, thank you. So it's 8:25. We're supposed to sort of close up shop at 8:30. Any last thoughts? John, I see you. You're on mute. John, you're on mute. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
John, you're on mute.
We still can't hear you, my dear. Sorry.
Okay.
I know you're saying something profound.
I know the Village of Mamaroneck went through a really tough period 10 years ago when the mayor and the board of trustees engaged in all the kind of rhetoric that we've been bemoaning and groaning. When I think it was the next mayor came in, a Republican who a lot of people didn't like, one of the first things he did was invite the CRC workers to bust the tables at the spring fair, at the summer fair on the main street with their t-shirts and paid them for it. And he was consistently giving signals that they are one of us. He did that quite heavily. I think if a new leader comes in, I think leadership can be very important on this. If Biden changes the rhetoric, it will have won't affect anything at all for the first few weeks. But eventually it will tone things down and open up possibilities at the moment just seem lost in the distance. That's
that's a good point. Before we go, Christina in the chat, Vanessa, do you have any thoughts on the future of Daca? Oh, Berta is also answering that she's optimistic. So my wish is that Daca leads to citizenship. Daca.
I wish I could be optimistic. This is a whole nother discussion. I'm not as sanguine as some people are that Biden is going to be inaugurated. I'm afraid that we are looking at a very problematic scenario. If that happens, then it is within the power of the executive branch to undo the destruction of that program and to at least allow it to continue. That does not necessarily mean it would result in more permanent status for the people involved, but we're talking about 800,000 people in this country, most of whom are very well educated and highly contributing, including many students in my law school. And we're hoping that indeed, if Biden is not inaugurated, I think Daca is dead. I don't think there's any chance it will survive.
That's painful to hear. Janet, Congress should pass permanent legislation to protect Daca and TPS. Absolutely. So that's something we can fight for on a national level.
One thing we're pretty sure about is doesn't look like we're going to have Congress. I mean, I would love to see it happen. Anybody who wants to work for Georgia, but that's the great challenge.
You can send her money.
So I have my one last comment.
Please.
If we're finishing up now, which is just, I thought I would post this in light of the holiday spirit. I thought it's appropriate to remember, as I said, our history. And that's the way it could have been in this country from the very beginning. It wasn't. And if only we could come back to the way that was, I think we would be a much stronger and happier country. as well as a much better force for good in the world.
Yeah, that's a pretty unbelievable image. Oh boy. We can't thank you enough for giving your time to us and helping to further educate the people who are interested in this. If anything, it'll bring about some good Thanksgiving dinner topics, whether that be virtual or small groups. Please look for our follow-up email where we'll send all of these resources, Vanessa's resources, anything that's been mentioned, we're going to collect it all and put it out there. Oh, there is one little thing here. The Village of Mamaroneck Committee to Reinvent and Reform Police, public comment dates 12/1, 12/10, 7 o'clock. I will publicize. Yes, we'll publicize that definitely. Thank you, Thea. And so thank you so much, everyone. What?
Wasn't that today?
No, they're 12. Well, yeah, December.
In a month.
Berta, thank you for being here. John, thank you for being here. Vanessa, thank you for being here. And our next panel is November 18th with our elected officials. We are really excited because we're going to look back, and you know what? We're going to start with immigration. Don't try to stop me. We're starting with immigration. Thank you so much. I truly, truly appreciate it. Have a great night and stay well. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.